Am I your first interview?
No, we spoke to Guy Standing previously.
Guy standing. Sounds
We also
familiar.
talked to Scott Santons.
Oh, you guys talked to Scott? What am I supposed to say following up after Scott Santos?
Yeah, you're the follow-up.
What?
Guy Standing founded the International Foundation for UBI.
Okay. Man, I'm feeling the pressure. What am I gonna bring to this conversation after Scott Santos? Yeah, I do wanna like throw in that I'm by no means like a policy expert or even politically savvy. So, but if you guys want to know more about my like the experience being like a volunteer,
Hmm.
that can
I
that
think that's where you're pretty unique.
Yeah, I think we can begin this interview. So I'm not sure if Tyler mentioned this yet, but this interview is going to be produced into a podcast.
okay.
And then, so we're going to transcribe it and then produce it into a podcast. And we hope this podcast can raise awareness of basic income in Taiwan and sort of introduce this public topic to the general public who may not really know about UBI yet. So today we'll cover some basic questions and sort of gradually go deeper. And we also will want to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 crisis and sort of the opportunities and the challenges it brings to when we're talking about advocating basic income. So could you define a basic income for us and maybe use a few sentences to explain your core beliefs with basic income?
Yeah. So okay, my definition of universal basic income is a monthly or a guaranteed monthly payment. I guess it doesn't have to be monthly. A guaranteed payment to citizens of a particular country, free of means testing or any other strings attached. That's the most full definition. Some core beliefs for me personally. I think like if we're I'm like a fan of science fiction, so when thinking in terms of science fiction and like where human civilization, human society is going to go, I feel like UBI is a requirement for whatever that human society is. I mean, assuming it's a benevolent one. Um, I think that UBI is a key first step to unlocking human potential, as well as reducing crime, violence, poverty, discrimination. Because I think a lot of those things are at the roots issues with like people just trying to get by and competing with each other for resources. I think like when you have a a mentality of abundance, then you can get past some of that stuff. And I think in terms of like solving some of our national as well as global challenges, climate change the biggest one. I think it makes a lot of sense to me what Andrew is saying about how people need to be economically secure before they can start thinking about and contributing to solutions for things like climate change. And then the final one, I guess, is I think I went way more than three sentences, but the final
No
one
problem.
is that I think in our current like capitalist societies, I think UBI is the only way that we're going to be able to avoid extreme wealth inequality. I read this Scientific American article a few months back where they basically had created a like the most accurate economic model to date of like our kind of capitalist economies, and like every way they ran it, it always ends up with one small group of people collecting all the wealth. like the wealth always concentrates into one place. Like it was like a physical phenomenon, and it doesn't really matter who that person is. It's just kind of a random person. But once you start earning money, whether through luck or chance, that money gives you an advantage in future exchanges, essentially. So I think without UBI, I mean, the conclusion that the scientists made was without UBI or some other form of wealth redistribution, you will always end up with extreme wealth inequality. So yeah, those are some of my core beliefs of UBI.
Yeah, so would you say that basic income could solve the extreme wealth inequality or potential extreme wealth inequality in the United States?
I don't know if it alone can solve it, and like I said, I'm not an economist, so I can't really speak confidently on this type of thing. But I do think UBI is a requirement and a first step for sure.
So I'll switch to the coronavirus. With a lot of countries issuing cash grants, there's a lot more attention with UBI. And in the United States right now, we're curious, what do you think the situation is there? How would you evaluate it as someone who's volunteered and kind of saw it on Andrew Yang's campaign and up until now? How do you think the situation has changed with the coronavirus?
I think it sounds like um, there are more people who if like there are people who were initially skeptical about UBI who now see the logic behind it. Um, so they're like more open-minded to it, and this goes for like some of my friends, as well as I've seen like some of Andrew Yang's podcast interviewees who have kind of said a similar thing, where it's like, oh, it took this crisis to kind of show us how right Andrew Yang was about some of the problems we face in this country, and that maybe UBI, even if temporary, is a good thing. Yeah. Um, I have some other notes here. So I guess the conclusion is like, I think it's been a much needed wake up call. And I think the increased attention for UBI is good, but from my perspective, it hasn't been enough. Like when we were initially talking about that first cash grant in the United States, at least within the social media circles that I follow, yes, a lot of people were saying like, look, we're all looking at Andrew Yang's ideas now. But it's been some time. I don't know if this is just because I've stopped following social media recently in general, but I feel like that tie to UBI is becoming less, uh, what, like less, it's lessening. And for good reason, because like a lot of our national focus or a lot of the focus for people now has like moved over to like Black Lives Matter. And obviously the pandemic itself. So there's a lot of like things splitting people's attention.
Well, when you were volunteering, what were some of the reactions you were getting from folks?
About UBI, so everyone was initially skeptical, most of the time because people would ask like, well, how do you pay for it? And then I would have to try to break it down, which is complicated. And like, it took me a while to get it right, like to spit numbers as well as Andrew does. But that's one. And then once you get past like the cost of it, then you get into like then you get into like whether it's right or wrong, right? You get people talking about like, well, very common talking points are like, well, people would just be lazy, or people have no incentive to work, or like why should so and so get that money and not such and such person, or also different arguments about, hard work and stuff like that, which I'm sure you guys have also run into too. It's like the most common oppositions to UBI. Yeah.
In terms of Donald Trump specifically and his coronavirus response, how would you evaluate him in terms of the possibility of doing something in terms of basic income related policies?
You mean what he has done, or well, my note here?
You can evaluate it in terms of what he's done, and also, do you think that there's a possibility that, for example, if Trump wins, but there's a Democratic Senate, is anything like basic income going to come?
I think. Okay, well, first, like evaluating Trump's policies, my note here seems poor, if not non-existent, because America has not done anything. We've done like pretty much nothing. We had a single cash grant back in April. That was 4 months ago for $1,200, which here in the Bay Area like barely covers people's rent for 1 month. We have, I don't know how much you guys have been following, but we now have like at least 40 million newly unemployed people, at least unemployment claims. It's been the 20th straight week of over 1 million unemployment claims. And then we had like this little 350 billion payment protection program that was supposed to go to small businesses, and this whole thing has happened where it's like apparently all the large businesses just sucked it out in 2 weeks. So yeah, can I swear on this podcast?
Sure.
That's right. Well, basically, like United States government has done pretty much fuck all for this coronavirus situation. So yeah, how would I evaluate Trump's policies? Poor, non-existent. Now, I think you were asking me like what I think. Do I think UBI will be a possibility in the future?
Sure, you can.
Okay. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. Andrew's pretty optimistic about it. I don't know. Not a political expert. I hope it happens. I think if it doesn't happen, we're screwed. Hopefully it happens sooner rather than later.
And for Andrew, when he was promoting UBI, he used terms like freedom dividend. Do you think there is a benefit from this in your experience promoting UBI? What is he going for when he says freedom dividend?
Yeah. Well, so as Andrew says, like they did testing to identify that phrase as something that would test well with the American audience. But other than that, like I think it's a fairly accurate term. It like cuts to the core philosophy of UBI, right, in the way that he was proposing, right? So instead of like just basic income, which sounds like a handout, which Americans are kind of allergic to, it's a dividend, which is very capitalist talk, where it's like, yeah, you invest, you can immediately draw the comparison between investing in the company and receiving dividends from the company, and that's kind of how it is, but with our government. And then the freedom part is like that. The point of it is to give you freedom to explore things that you want to do and have economic freedom. Yeah, I think it probably did help with marketing. I mean, I'm sure it helped with marketing because that's what they tested it for. Let's see how do you, yeah.
Well, and in the process of your own personal experience, you said you're kind of watching people change their views on social media. What do you think the changes that Andrew Yang made to the American conversation were?
Well, I think the universal basic income thing definitely like that was some of us had already heard of this idea before and were already on board with the idea before Andrew Yang came along. I think myself included, but it wasn't a mainstream idea. So what Andrew did with that was he mainstreamed the concept of UBI. Um, what else? What else was there? Can you remind me what the question was?
For Andrew Yang changing the conversation in American
Oh,
society. Yeah.
oh, the other thing that I wanted to say was the thing that I really like about his campaign was the humanity first philosophy. Um, I think that is something new and it's something different in American politics that kind of has, to me at least, has broke through like the whole kind of just left versus right dynamic of our political conversations. Being a volunteer, I felt that I could actually see this kind of humanity first philosophy coming to life in terms of the volunteers that were attracted to come out for the campaign, as well as the way that we interacted with people. One of the things that we made sure to do while we were out there, and this was like no one told us to do this. It was just like volunteers talking to each other about how our experiences and how we can better engage with people. And a lot of us would engage Republicans or conservatives on an equal level. Like we'd be like, "Hey, we totally understand where you're coming from, right? And although we're campaigning for a Democratic nominee, the problems that we're trying to solve are for all Americans. So we still tried at least to engage with Republicans in conversation." And I think, and that was like not only just in the door-to-door knocking, but also at night, like after our door-to-door canvassing, when we'd go to the bars and just hang out with people and stuff like that. And I think that set Yang Gang volunteers apart from volunteers from other campaigns, and I was told so by the locals. So, I mean, it's a small thing, and I don't really know how large of a scale that has affected people, but to me, that's a pretty big one. This idea of humanity first.
Yeah, so you mentioned like working along with other volunteers, and I'd like to move on to your own experience volunteering for the Andrew Yang's campaign. So, could you share with us some of like the advocacy and community communication strategies for basic income during the campaign?
Uh, I was just a foot soldier, so I don't really know anything about strategy. Let me see. Which question was this on this? Um, this is
Like
trying to find my notes.
I think
You
it's the
guys have it up?
fifth one.
The fifth one? Oh, man, I think I just got this scrambled. Okay. Oh, okay. Yes. Communication strategies. Well, so Andrew Yang came like he got jump started by the Joe Rogan podcast and other podcasts. So I think that was like one thing that they did differently, was to engage people through podcasts, through more through social media. I don't know if that was much more than any of the other candidates, but there was that. Uh, in terms of my personal experience, honestly, like you'll probably hear this from many people who are involved with it. It was pretty improvised. It was of a very improvised nature. We didn't get like a super we weren't like super well trained or anything like that. We didn't really have any guidelines. But I kind of like that because what we found was that when we got out there to Iowa, or just when we were volunteering in our local communities, that everyone who was showing up, everyone was very different, first of all, but we all had our hearts in a very similar place. And so we didn't really need training to go out and talk to people, I felt, because everyone involved was already so passionate about these messages that we could just go out and like speak in our own language about um, about Andrew Yang's policies and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if there was any specific strategy. We just went out and talked to people, and we tried to be humanity first.
Yeah. So what about those who are like very unfamiliar with the issue of basic income? Is there like a certain way you guys did to advocate to those people or to reach the voters who were very unfamiliar with this issue?
Yeah, we would just teach them. We would teach them about it. So let me think. So like, and you would have to do this with, I mean, not many people were familiar with the idea. They may have heard about it, right? And they're like, oh, something about $1,000 a month, but that was it. Especially out in Iowa, right? Here in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley, UBI might be more of a more common concept. But there, basically everyone that I talked to, I was prepared to explain it to them. Fortunately, it's not too hard to explain. It's $1,000 a month for everyone. The harder part was talking about how to pay for it. And for that, I kind of drew on, like, I remember some of like the long drives I had in Iowa, we just put on like Andrew Yang's Joe Rogan podcast, and then I would take notes while he's spitting out those numbers and try to remember them for myself. So yeah, we would just try to educate people. We'd be like, well, this is UBI. What do you think? And people would be like, well, how do you pay for it? And then I would go into my spiel about, well, Andrew Yang wants to fund it with a 10% VAT, and what that is a such and such and such and such. Yeah.
Were there any like difficulties or challenges when you were confronted with them, like during face-to-face interactions?
Yeah, definitely. Most people in Iowa were fairly friendly, but every now and then, yeah, even some of the people who were, yeah, I had some pretty interesting experience. Okay, so like, there was one house where I knocked on the door, or I rang the doorbell, and then just from inside, just immediately, this guy just shouted like like go fucking go away or something like that. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, sir, and I walked away. And then he came out, he was like, oh shoot, I thought it was the neighborhood kids. My bad. And then he turned out to be super nice, and we talked about the policies and stuff like that. So every now and then you get people who are just like, I'm sorry, I'm never gonna vote Democrat, and they just like close the door on you. I did have one experience where before I even got to speak to someone, was just like walking onto the driveway, and this pretty big man came out of the building, and I was like, hello. And he would just started shouting at me, and he was just like, you're standing on private property right now. And like, and such and so I was just like, I'm sorry. And I turned away and started walking away. But even then, afterwards, while I was walking away with my tail between my legs, this car pulled up, and this guy rolled out his window, and it was the guy's family. And they're like, we're so sorry about that. We recently just had like a death in the family, so he's in a bad mood. We're really sorry about that. So all in all, people, at least in Iowa, were really friendly to us.
From your experience, I thought that was an interesting anecdote about the crazy guy. What do you think? What do you think are the kind of voters that you've found tend to oppose or maybe support basic income?
Which voters tended to support basic income?
And oppose, if you could.
And oppose.
Yeah.
Supporters would typically lean young. So like younger people, I felt like were more open to these newer ideas. Occasionally, Like people who were, clearly more like middle or mid upper class with college educations. Like one of the precinct or one of the regions that I knocked door to door on was right next to their local college. So that those conversations were definitely a little bit different from when we were talking to the more blue collar areas. I think the the people who were like super on board, who like really liked Andrew Yang already, tended to be like just kind of I say oddballs, but in a loving way. Just like kind of people who are a little bit quirky, kind of maybe leaning a little bit on the hippie side of things, which kind of makes sense. And then I guess in terms of people who oppose it, um, again, this is Iowa, so there wasn't like violent opposition, but the most skeptical people. I mean, I guess you get skeptics from all across demographics, honestly. Yeah.
What about people that you had mentioned some Republicans earlier? How do you talk to them about basic income?
About basic income specifically, um, man, it's been a while, so I kind of have to think about how those conversations went. Oh, okay. Like the way that I would kind of frame conversations with Republicans and conservatives is to frame it as like it's your money anyways, like you pay taxes, it's your money anyways, or uh, like money is just like the people on the top, the 1%, the people in these large corporations earn so much freaking money. I would kind of be a little self-deprecating, and I would be like, I'm from the Silicon Valley. I see it out there as much as anyone. Like those people don't do anything, and they just like earn like millions and billions of dollars, right? Why are they worth that much? Why can't we just give you your money back? And kind of frame it in that direction. That is your money, and the 1% are taking it anyways, and I would rather it go to you and your community. One of the like pretty effective talking points that I had was before going into each town, I would look at the population. I would look up the population of the town, and then I would multiply it by $1,000 a month, right? And whatever number that came out to be, which usually would be like, 1 million up to 10 million, depending on how large that town was. I could go up to these people and say like, listen, $1,000 a month for all adults in your town right now, that would be an annual investment of like $1 million into this town. Now, in a city like Taipei or something like that, or San Francisco, it doesn't mean anything. But in like some of these towns were just middle of nowhere, rural, just like houses that were like just kind of spread out and really old buildings, not much activity going on, closed down shops in the downtown and stuff like that, just kind of sleepy, um, like yeah, poor towns, I guess. When you tell those people $1 million into your city, like that kind of gets people thinking. It's like imagine what $1 million could do for this town. And it's just like, whoa, I've never thought of that before. Yeah.
And in terms of getting different types of groups to unite for basic income, what is your strategy that you found as effective to get different types of people working together?
I I'm not like I wasn't like part of the staff, so I wasn't in a leadership position, so I can't really answer that. Other than my opinion. My opinion is that we probably need to speak to different groups of people in their own languages. So, for example, like some of the arguments that I made don't sell as well to different parts of the population. I can't really think of it off the top of my head because I'm rusty. But uh,
like, okay, I'm gonna refer to my notes here. Yeah, we need to. I mean, I think we just basically need to stick to this humanity first ethos and be willing to cross political lines, talk to people in their own language. There's been some conversation within the Yang Gang. It's popped up a couple times about this thing called the moral foundations theory, and it kind of like categorizes people's belief systems and values into a couple different categories. Like, I think one is like sanctity, one is like loyalty, one is like care. And there's been like a study about how like Democrats and Republicans kind of value certain things differently. So I think you need to be able to speak to those things. There's one way to speak to older people. There's a different way to speak to younger people, right? You might speak to younger people with like memes on social media or something like that. Older people, you probably have to actually get out there and speak to them in person, shake their hand, that kind of thing.
So speaking of like young people and social media, could you share some of your experiences with like social media and or like public relations on implementing or advocating for a basic income from your experience?
I don't have much experience. I'm not very good with social media. I only got on social media because of the Andrew Yang campaign for the most part.
Oh.
So I'm not super familiar with what's going on there, and I don't really know best strategies for that kind of thing. It's tough. There's just so much stuff on social media these days, and most people aren't looking on social media for, serious conversation type of things. So, yeah, I guess a lot of these questions we're basically talking about how do we communicate UBI to people. And my opinion is like there's no better way than just going out and talking to people in person, which has been a problem here because when I came back from Iowa, like I had big dreams about like this project that I wanted to do where we would go to small businesses and talk to small businesses about universal basic income. But then, COVID happened. So no one's talking to anyone anymore, and that makes it hard. That's one of the things that Yang Gang is struggling with right now because everything is done virtually, and it's just hard to energize even our own support base through through like Slack or Skype and stuff like that. So it's tough. Now in Taiwan, and I don't know if this can be a two-way interview, but like in Taiwan, it's a more homogenous, smaller society. You guys have pulled off this COVID situation, surviving the pandemic. You guys are opening up everywhere, so you guys have the ability to go out and talk to people. Honestly, like during Andrew Yang's campaign, I talked to my dad several times about this idea of UBI in Taiwan because, yeah, I don't know if we want to go there. I guess. Do you guys have any other questions? Or do you guys want to like get through your questions first, or?
Oh, no worries. Tyler, do you want to talk about UBI in Taiwan? I think it'd be an interesting discussion.
Sure. So what's your question?
Well, what's the situation with UBI in Taiwan? Like, how many people like know about it? Is it a new concept? In the setting of Taiwan, like what are the ideas for funding it? I'm really curious about that too.
In Taiwan, we did a poll a few years ago, and I'd say that realistically, there's probably 1 in 10 people who have heard about it in 2017. And that was mostly because of the Swiss referendum at the time, I think. And we also actually asked what types of funding mechanisms Taiwanese people would support, and they said things like pollution taxes and property taxes, and the lowest were sales taxes. They were really against, and income taxes they were really against. So the main ways that you'd probably find kind of the last mile of funding, most people didn't like paying more in income tax. That was very unpopular. But if polluters have to pay, then they're very supportive of that.
I see. Makes sense. Has anyone proposed any like payment methods? I actually did look up about UBI Taiwan. I don't think I found your guys' specific org, but I found like some random presentation slides that I struggled to read. I needed my dad to help me read them. And even then I didn't really have like the context around it to understand how they were proposing it.
Well, we wrote a white paper where we were a little bit more in depth. We've written two. We wrote one for generally UBI, and we wrote a coronavirus proposal that we spoke with some legislators about.
Okay.
So if you want to see that, I could send you some of those materials too.
Yeah, I would love to. Do I have a free pass to ask you guys questions now, or
You're the interviewer now.
yeah, or is there anything else you guys want to ask
Emily
me?
had some other quick questions, and then maybe you
Yeah.
can flip it around again.
Yeah. We're just interested to know, how did you join the Yang Gang? Like, were you interested in like the Democratic nominees proposals or their campaigns, or are you just interested in basic income?
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, I'd known about basic income before, but I had never really studied it. I didn't really have like an idea of how to fund it and stuff like that. I only knew it as a concept. When I heard of Andrew Yang, I think it was probably spring of 2019, probably soon after the Joe Rogan podcast, because I mean, to be frank, there aren't too many like Asian politicians in the United States, especially one running for president. So when I heard somewhere about, Asian man running for president, I was really interested. And he was on a Joe Rogan podcast, which I like anyways. So I gave it a listen, and I was like, wow, I really like this guy. After that, my involvement was limited to donations. I kept donating. And it was only like in the fall or in the winter when I got a text saying, I think by this point I started with text banking. Okay, so I maxed the donations, and then I was like, well, I can't donate anymore, but I still want to contribute, because at that time things were getting really exciting. And I was like, okay, I'll text bank, but text banking is terrible. So then I tried phone banking. Phone banking is arguably even worse. So then, and then around that time, I got a text saying like, "Hey, your local Yang Gang is meeting at this restaurant tonight. You should, or will you join?" And that I live like just 10-minute walk from that place, so I would have gone past it anyways to get food. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure, and I'll just show up, and if it feels awkward, I'll just leave. But I ended up going, and I met all these I met like my first Yang Gang people, and everyone was so great. The energy was so positive and so good, and such like a diverse group of people that I kept going to help out. And then one day, I'm just starting getting a little long-winded, but one day basically this guy came in, and he had just gone to Iowa. And he was like really excited. He had like a kind of energy in his eyes. And what tipped me over the edge was, I'd been thinking about like going for a while, but like I was like, oh, I don't know, I gotta take time off work and stuff like that. Sounds kind of crazy. But someone else in that room was introducing this guy who had just come back to someone else, and she said before he went, he was a totally different person. She was saying like basically before he went, he was kind of like he was just kind of like low energy, kind of feeling kind of depressed and stuff like that. And that was like really hard for me to imagine because when I met him, he was just like brimming with excitement. And so I was like, okay, I gotta go see what this thing is all about in Iowa. And I ended up going like a week later. Yeah, and that I spent 2 weeks in Iowa up to the caucus, and those were probably like two of the most exciting and adventurous weeks of my life in my recent memory. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds great.
It was
So
really good. Like the experiences that we had in Iowa were like we could do a whole podcast interview on that stuff. And like that stuff I can speak to you about. I'm not I can't speak confidently on policy and stuff like that, but yeah. The going ons on the ground in Iowa, that I can speak to.
yeah, so like on your experiences in Iowa, is there like anything special you think that UVI Taiwan we could gain insights from?
Hmm.
Or just anything interesting?
There was a lot of us got stuck in the snow. I got stuck in the snow in the middle of nowhere, and fortunately, like the one guy who lived over there kind of saw my car in the distance and came over with his like big, super powered farmer truck and like pulled me out of the ditch. There was also a really interesting situation where one of our volunteers like was right outside of our base when he was approached by this guy who apparently called him like a what was it, a yellow-skinned rice-eating rat, I think he called him. But this volunteer just just didn't react very strongly to it and just kept talking to him because he had been like a missionary before, so he was like used to this kind of stuff. Kept talking to this guy, and at the end of it, the guy was like on board with Andrew Yang. I heard him later in a coffee shop telling his friend like how good the Yang campaign was. He was telling his friend that yeah, like these people on the Yang campaign, they are, I think he said they are hot shit is what he said, which I think is a good thing, or like top shit or something like that. So that was fun too. Yeah, a lot of good experiences. But at the caucus, what was interesting was for me personally, I didn't get many. We had these things called commit to caucus cards. Basically, if someone sounded like they were supportive, we would have them fill out a card that basically said that, like, yes, I will show up at the caucus to vote. And that was kind of gold for us volunteers. I didn't get any. For the longest time, I didn't get any. And I was like, am I not pushing hard enough? Or I didn't get very many of those. But at the caucus itself, I had like a bunch of people show up that I had talked to, or even like there was this Indian grandma who came out, who I didn't even meet. I only met her grandsons, and
Wow.
I had talked to her grandsons, and I had left a note, and she came out because of that. There was this one lady who was this older lady who was just shoveling like ice on her driveway, and I just asked her for directions, and then I went like, well, by the way, have you heard of Andrew Yang? And she was pretty dismissive about it. She's like, I don't know if I'm gonna vote for this guy. And I was like, okay. Well, I told her some stuff, and I was like, well, have a nice day. Thanks for the directions. I moved on. She showed up to caucus for Andrew Yang, so that was pretty exciting. That like just, and maybe that's where UBI Taiwan can draw inspiration. It's like you don't really know how much of an impact you've had, right? Like you can just have like a positive energy and like talk to someone in a friendly manner and be open-minded to them. I don't know what the political situation is in Taiwan is really like, but here in America it's pretty divisive. So I think like when people had this experience with a Yang Gang volunteer where like they felt like they were not being judged, where this person like really was trying to like do something good for everyone, that I think that caught people's attention. um yeah, okay, I'll give you one more. So one more experience I had was I was looking for this house. It was like in a small cul-de-sac, and I was just kind of wandering about there, and I was very obvious, let's just say, walking around in Iowa, like this Asian guy who's no one's ever seen Asian people. This Asian guy from California. I was wearing like this brightly colored jacket too, so I stood out a lot. So from this building, this guy came came out and he was like, "Can I help you with something?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm looking for this house. I'm a volunteer for Andrew Yang." And he was just like, "All right, come in out of the cold." So I go into this building and it's like there's like six dudes working on these big trucks, and they do I don't know what the proper terminology is, but they go to people's like homes and they pick up their sewage, basically. So blue collar type job, honestly a pretty dirty job, you know. Like you like your hands dirty. They're like maintaining their trucks and stuff like that. Very blue collar like type of guys. And so I step into this garage with like six tough looking guys around me. Probably I think they were definitely conservative. So like when I was mentioning like Andrew Yang, they were like all pretty dismissive off the bat, but they started grilling me, started asking me questions, but I was prepared and I just answered a lot of their questions. I did my spiel to like everyone in there. And like their kind of the leader guy told me that like, you know, if they're I don't want to like toot my own horn, but he was like, look, if nothing else, um, I respect you for still being here, because a lot of people would have walked out and like with their tail between the legs. And I think that experience was probably true to a lot of people outside. Or what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that like I think Yang Gang made that impression on a lot of people. We talked to a lot of people who were not Democrats, but we talked to them still respecting them as like human beings, and we tried to connect with them, and I think a lot of people appreciated that.
In terms of young people who seem to respond to this, um, could you give us a little bit of your impression from experiences and discussions you've had with younger people? Why are they so interested in UBI?
I think the thing with young people is that maybe it's going too far to say that young people are like, you know, all aboard. Because honestly, I didn't meet too many. They were probably in school. Um, but when speaking with young people, well, I think there's the immediate thing where like I come off as a young person too. I mean, I definitely look pretty young, so they feel like they're speaking to, you know, a peer. But also, I think young people understand how bad the world is, I think, or like the how terrible, like how bad a lot of things are, how broken a lot of things are. So you just it doesn't take much to they already understand the problems that you're talking about, and they're also more open to new ideas as well. But I don't know. I don't know that I've still had like trouble with my own friends, convincing my own friends about UBI. So yeah, I'm not really sure.
And as somebody who first kind of got in contact with UBI, what do you think from that point when you first got in touch with UBI? How has your own opinion changed? And then I'm also curious, moving forward, you had mentioned that you wanted to work with businesses. How has that plan changed? What is your project that you want to go with going forward?
So, okay, the first part of your question with UBI, I think before I considered it like a concept, but and a concept that definitely I was supportive of, and that probably should be done anyways before I knew anything about it. I think over the course of Andrew's campaign, I've like really made my argument more rigorous. You know, I have facts and numbers and studies to back that up now. And because of that, personally, I know I feel like I know even more strongly that UBI is the right way to go. That is the thing that needs to be done. The second part of your question was the project thing, the idea that I had. Okay, so basically my thought is like, okay, if you're going to try to convince people about UBI, right, you have to talk to them face to face. That was probably the biggest lesson that I learned in Iowa, right? Like phone banking, text banking, it just, I'm pretty skeptical of that stuff. Like it just doesn't work. People don't answer their phones these days. But contrast that with, you know, me just asking directions to that person that was shoveling ice, and then she shows up to caucus, right? That's like a casual, not even trying that hard face-to-face interaction, and that got her to flip over. So my idea with the businesses and stuff is like, okay, well, where are people at, right? Other than knocking on people's doors, where are people at? Well, they're in your local communities. They're at your local businesses. I live in a city called San Mateo, just like 10 minutes away from a like mid-sized downtown area, and I walk over there a lot. I know some of the restaurant owners by just being there. And I feel like those are the types of places where you need to be visible with UBI. So I don't know. In short, like my idea was you develop this brand, right? I called it the 1K campaign, and I had this logo that was just like, you know, something looks like a coin, says 1K. And the idea was to go to these small business owners, talk to them about this idea of UBI, and if they were on board, give them like a sticker that they could put up on their windows. I don't know if I know Taiwan doesn't really use Yelp, right? But in the US, like we use this app called Yelp, and if a restaurant's very highly rated on Yelp, they sometimes get this Yelp people love us on Yelp sticker, and they put it on their windows so that you know people like that place. And I was basically thinking along those lines for UBI, right? Just kind of a guerrilla viral, I don't know, campaign to increase exposure to the idea, which is probably something that I could totally see being done in Taiwan too. I think Taiwan like has a very high number of people going out to eat because food is so cheap. People probably know their neighbors and like they're the vendors that are nearby them, and I think word would spread quickly if you just like you gotta get to the but you gotta get to the people that you gotta get to the places where people are.
Yeah. So after Andrew Yang dropped out of the presidential campaign, has the volunteer work continued, or like what's the volunteer's next step?
We're trying to figure that out right now. And I have to give credit to some other volunteers who have been putting a lot of work into it, because I admittedly have like taken a few steps back a bit, because it's hard. There's not too much you can do. Okay, but the situation with Yang Gang is this. Andrew has started like a new organization called Humanity Forward. They're it's a very small org. It's just like a handful of people, including Andrew, running that. I think over the course of the campaign, there were kind of complaints about how I think there were some kind of professional political campaign people who weren't like ideologically, who were like there for the job, you know, kind of thing. And there were some complaints that these people were not doing as good of a job as just your everyday volunteer could do. So after the campaign, the Yang or Humanity Forward has kind of taken that feedback and has tried to give like the volunteers more autonomy and allow them to decide for themselves how they want to interact with Humanity Forward as an organization. And so that's kind of where we are now, where we have like this national level group, and then each state kind of has its own thing. California's happens to be fairly active, which I think is to be expected. And then everyone's just trying to figure out like how to organize, and like we're doing like mission statements, you know, vision statements, org structure, that type of thing. And in the meanwhile, like the kind of big activity that we're trying to get people to do is to phone bank for local, I guess I can't call them politicians, but local candidates. Yeah.
So then, based on your past experiences, what do you think are some of the best words of advice and encouragement you would have to our team here in Taiwan?
How about before I answer that question, like what has your experience been? Like, are you guys like going out and talking to people, like, and has the reception been like okay, good, bad? Like, what's it like out there?
Well, I started in 2016 in Taiwan, and we brought our group together basically in 2017, and then we officially founded in 2018. So it's kind of like small steps at a time, and we've had some conferences where we bring in folks from, you know, different experts from around the world, and it's kind of slowly been building over time. More people hear about it, and especially with Andrew Yang, I think that was a big boost to us because because of his connection with Taiwan, and so that brought extra attention that probably wouldn't have had he not his parents weren't Taiwanese. So I think that the reception has been fairly positive. Usually Taiwanese are open to hearing about anything, but they're very skeptical, especially on the funding question. So they say it's you know, just it's a great idea, but you can't fund it. And in Taiwan, that's in some ways true because the tax system is not very effective at getting people's money. So everybody is very good at figuring out how to not pay to the government.
I see.
So
yeah, the funding part is key, I think. Like even for me, even after coming back from Iowa, I was like, I still don't really understand this super well. And while I had the energy for it, I was trying to really pin down the funding question, and it was still hard because I don't have a good mind for economics. I'm just bad. I'm just bad at it. And but I think that's really important because it always comes down to the funding question. And I think this whatever is the proposed solution needs to be translated into a way that makes it very clear to people how it's going to be funded. Like we need like animated videos or something like that, you know? You can't just like be like me talking to people trying to like counting on my fingers. Well, one, the first source, stay with me here. The first source is going to be this or this or this. The second source is such and such and such, and not have citations and stuff like that either. So I think that needs to be like really, it needs to be really well put together, and the volunteers that are speaking about it also need to have that funding question like on lock. Uh, yeah, and I haven't really figured out a great way to figure that out yet. But I don't know. I think like just going into like conversational now, but I feel like Taiwan is like a really great place for the idea of UBI. Other than the funding question, I feel like culturally it fits. Like Taiwan is not afraid of like new ideas. Um, I feel like Taiwan takes care of its people and has a sense of community. This could be a grass is greener type of thing. Maybe I'm just like, I've only seen enough to really love Taiwan and not seen the bad sides of it. But yeah, and so okay, in conversations with my dad, going a little just off the top now, I've I've often had conversations with my dad about Taiwan's economic situation. For a couple of years, I have actually been thinking about moving back. And one of like my dad's counter arguments is like, well, Taiwan's not like stable as in terms of economics, right? Because you're kind of getting frozen out by China. And I kind of feel like, at least from a high level conceptual point of view, it's like that seems to be uh, the perfect problem that could be solved by UBI, right? If you're being economically frozen out by this giant, then you kind of really have to rely on your own internal talent and your internal human potential. And I think like you, we kind, Taiwan kind of has this already, where it's like there's like, I guess the cost of living is really low, or so I'm told. Cost of living
Yes.
is really low. So even if young people can't or like young people don't see many paths for like promotion to a high paying job, that people can get by, and you can work, I don't know, you can work at a restaurant or have a food stall and survive, right? And I think that's like that's adjacent to what we want to do with UBI, where it's like you can just get by, and by getting by, hopefully you can do some more things that you actually want to do. I don't know what I don't know what my point is. I guess I'm just really hopeful that you guys can get some traction in Taiwan, and then I'm moving back for sure. And then the rest of the world will. There's also the thing about like, I think like if just hypothetically, if Taiwan were to be the first country to implement UBI and it was successful, that would be a huge like badge of honor, I think. Just like the way Taiwan has dealt with this COVID situation, it's like, yeah, we don't have that much recognition on the global political stage, but there are some things, if Taiwan does really well, that kind of makes you have to pay attention to this little country that people say is not a country.
Well, do you have any other comments that you think that we didn't cover?
Um, I don't know. I'm honestly more curious about you guys. But I know it's like 9 o'clock. I don't know how long you guys have, or what do you guys do this full time?
We're all volunteers.
You're all volunteers. Is this are you guys running as a nonprofit or something like
We
that?
are.
Or
Yeah, we're an NGO.
so you're funded through donations?
We are, interestingly enough, we have a relationship with the American Institute in Taiwan, and so a lot of because I run a grant for them, and so I directly donate the money I make from that grant into the NGO, because it's just given to the NGO. So a lot of our funding ends up coming from the Americans.
Okay. I'm guessing you guys are based in Taipei.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys like talked to people in other parts of Taiwan? Do you feel like there's a difference in reception in different regions of Taiwan?
Maybe Emily can comment on that. I would say, I mean, we have folks from all over Taiwan. They come to Taipei to study, etc. So they end up coming to the organization. Um, would I say maybe the southern part of Taiwan seems a little bit more, they're not as uptight. So maybe they've been a little bit more open to it than northern, but I can't really say because people in Taipei, there's a mix of all of Taiwan in Taipei
Yeah.
already. So it's
Yeah.
hard for me to say, oh, this is actually, Taipei, or this is in reality they're from, Jiayi or wherever.
Yeah.
Emily, what do you think? Is there a difference?
Um, I'm like born and raised Taipei. I rarely even leave Taipei, so I'm not sure if I can comment on this, but I would say that from my own observations, like at least a younger generation in Taipei is like relatively very politically active
Mhm.
and
Oh,
very like
good.
socially aware, I would say. And um the majority of our volunteers are from Taipei, and we have a few that study in like the southern parts of Taiwan and come to join us every month.
You said young people are pretty politically
Yeah,
educated.
yeah.
That's good. It's good to hear. My dad seemed to think otherwise
Oh, really?
because of I think he said he was disappointed in some election result. I forgot what it was. I forgot what it was about.
Oh.
Was it the mayorship? I don't remember.
Oh, I see.
Was he
Yeah,
Taipei mayor?
I think so. I
Or
don't
he doesn't
remember.
like
It was a
cut?
long time ago.
Okay.
Anyways, Emily, did you go to like TAS or something?
no, no.
Why is your English so good?
Oh, I actually studied in the US when I was younger. I lived in
Okay.
Fremont.
Yeah, I grew up in
Yeah.
Fremont.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Wait, for how long? I went to Wybell Elementary. I
Oh,
like
I
lived.
went to a Christian school,
Okay.
Fremont Christian Elementary School.
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
heard of that. That's crazy.
Rick, you
Interesting.
said, how are you connected to TAS?
I'm not. I just know people that went. I know about it.
Yeah.
I did an internship after college in Hsinchu, and there were a lot of kids I feel like from TAS or something like that. I had a friend who also moved to Taiwan, went to TAS when he was young, and I've hung out with some people from there. So, yeah, I was just guessing.
I teach the TAS kids
Oh, really? What do you teach? Is it
debate.
that's your actual job?
That's how I make money.
That's cool. Um, Shoot, I want to ask you guys so many questions that like I can't even come up with them right now. Like, well, okay, so my issue is like I don't really know too many young people in Taiwan. So it's been hard for me to get until like my last visit. It's been hard for me to kind of get an idea of what the situation is like there for young people, like economically, maybe as well as politically. Like what is like kind of the mood there? I mean, what it sounds like, it sounds similar to the situation in the United States, but yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, what's the economic situation like over there in terms of jobs and careers?
I'd say that it's very typically for young people it's higher unemployment uh, and pretty stagnant wages, but you'll find a job and it'll be about like $1,000 approximately a month, and then it'll stay about that much for 10 years. So
Yeah.
that's common.
Yeah, I would say like the stagnant wages is bigger of a problem than unemployment. Like you can, it's not really that difficult to find a job, but if you want a job with, um, like the ability to get a raise every few years, then it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Mm.
I
Do
think a
people
lot of
feel
I
like
think a lot of young kids they kind of try to look for better jobs, and that's really why the unemployment is higher because it's just a pretty bad. There's not as many good selections as there should be.
see? And is there a sense that people, like young people, leave Taiwan for opportunities elsewhere?
Yeah.
Where are they going? They, I guess, coming to the United States still?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or China.
Yeah.
That's actually what I work with the American officials here is encouraging them not to. Well, we're encouraging them to go to the U.S. instead of China,
I see.
so that there's
Well, that makes
more
sense.
exchange between Taiwan and the U.S. instead of Taiwan and China in terms
Yeah.
of tech.
Tyler, what does the American Institute work on? What are the types of things that they work on?
Well, so I mean, they try to get weapons for Taiwan. They do. I mean, everything that an embassy would do, they manage that relationship, and yeah, like they're bringing out the highest level official in 40 years now because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So recently we've had very good relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan, and so ironically, that's actually helped UBI Taiwan in a strange way because it's opened up a lot more funding that I've been able to use for UBI, and they've given us a platform for doing some conferences where we're inviting UBI experts to speak on like UBI and how it relates to education and talent development.
Okay. What are the next steps for UBI Taiwan?
We're talking about doing a march, so like a public march where we get different groups together to publicly promote UBI. We're in the stages of doing that and kind of reaching out to different NGOs. We're also talking about doing a individual experiment. So we set it out to a handful of folks, and we're looking at targeting people with background, maybe domestic violence or those single mothers, those types of groups, as our starting point for folks that we could maybe assist with some cash grants and then see what the impact might be. So those are the two bigger projects that we're talking about doing right now.
Okay. Do you guys have any like potential candidates that would come out for a UBI? I think like for that you might need like a pretty thought out plan and proposal, I suppose.
So as I mentioned, when we did the coronavirus white paper, we met with a few legislators, and they were receptive. Their main issue was, well, number one is that the ruling party didn't want to send out cash, so it was just impossible to do it. And then the second thing is that they didn't want to be out there alone without a lot of widespread support. So their call to action to us was to get more diverse NGOs with some influence to back the idea before they come out publicly and support it. So it's kind of, I think that you need somebody like Andrew to come out and kind of be the person who's the spokesperson for this idea. But in Taiwan, there's like kind of a very risk averse attitude that they don't want to be the first one. So we want to gather a lot of support behind them so that they'll be more willing to kind of come out in support of it.
Did Andrew get a lot of exposure in Taiwan?
What do you think, Emily? I think there was quite a bit of news about him. I mean,
Yeah.
but I'm very bad, bias because like all the people newsfeed or
Yeah.
UBI.
Right.
They're
Echo
connected to me, and so they know of UBI. So I don't know how much that distorted my perspective.
Yeah, I think Andrew Yang definitely had a lot of exposure in Taiwan. And I know, so I joined UBI Taiwan earlier this year, and with a lot of volunteers that joined with me, they actually knew of UBI because of Andrew Yang.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yang Gang Taiwan.
Yeah, Yang Gang Taiwan.
We did have a Taipei Yang Gang.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Man, I wish I could. I would have been in Taiwan in February if it wasn't for this coronavirus thing. I was gonna go with friends for like 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
I wish I could. I wish I was there now. Probably should have gone, and they just stayed.
A lot of folks actually that I know, I have a lot of folks that I've met who have kind of came during that period and then never left. They're still here. It was supposed to be like a 2-week vacation, and then
Are they
turned into
Taiwanese
6 months.
citizens?
Yeah, they're Taiwanese.
Oh, they're Taiwanese citizens.
Well, they're actually, I do know some foreigners too who were coming here, and then they were like, "Oh, I'm gonna just find a job here."
Oh, okay.
It's America, you know.
Yeah, I think we can keep in touch, and you can come visit us when you
Yeah, I would
visit
love that.
Taiwan.
Yeah, when I can leave my house. So terrible. All right, sounds good. It was great talking to you guys. It's really encouraging to know that there are allies in my mother country, as there should be. I'm not surprised, but I'm glad you guys are there, and I hope you guys keep fighting for it in Taiwan.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, should we call it an interview then?
Keep in touch.
All right.
Keep in touch. Reach out anytime.
Yeah. Let me know when the podcast comes out,
Of
so
course.
I can cringe at myself.
That's the whole point.
All right. See you
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye-bye.
Good luck with everything.
辛苦了。
珍妮，这个头像是谁？OK， 珍妮不在。All right。
听得到我说话吗？
哦，听得到
哦，听得到了。
哦耶！
是
不是这当是我啊，
国中的
时
时
候。
哎，
是我好几年前的时候。还很尬，
因
为我今天就是在车上，就是听，所以我就只能用我的手机登 Skype， 然后发现哇是好久之前的账号，感觉是很中二的脸。
我不要。
好耶，太好亲切哦。然后想说大家还是快速分享一下，就是你听的印象比较深刻的故事啊，或是你觉得比较有 insight 的地方可以延伸的。因为他今天讲的东西，我自己算觉得其实跟那个 Scott Stanton 的东西算是蛮有关联的，说不定可能可以是以补充观点的方式来完成一篇文章，所以可能大家可以在因为而且其实我中间有点飞要，所以我自己不是飞要，就是我搭车走路还要搭电梯就常常断线，所以就大家等一下可以就是多讲一点细节，然后我可以在中文摘要这边多补充一些内容，这样。好，那我们就轮流讲好了，要不要先从方如跟品义，看你们谁要先？
嗨，好，我觉得我听到几个比较有趣的，当然一个就是他在 campaign 里面就是去敲那个就是街上人家的门，就是还蛮有趣的。然后因为他们都是从 Andrew Yang 的 campaign 开始做，所以其实这个经验是我们比较体会不到的这样子。然后 他是不是有说他自己做了一个 1K campaign，就是他自己嘛，打造一个品牌，然后他计划就是那个给支持 UBI 的店家一个贴纸这样子，然后我觉得还蛮有趣的这个想法，因为基本上你要说服到让那个店其实就是愿意用这个店的那个曝光度来推广 UBI，其实蛮不容易的。但如果就是真的有那个贴纸，还也是蛮有趣的一个想法。就是表示既然有，就是他既然是从就是中小企业或者是 local business 的角度出发，对，然后我就想到就是像香港有那种黄店地图那种，对。就是对对对，然后搞不好就是我们就是之后支持 UBI 的人就会到支持 UBI 的店消费之类的那种感觉，对，我觉得蛮有趣这个角度，因为就没有想过，然后然后还有一个观点是，他说，因为他对台湾的印象就是他接受的管道可能也有限吧，可是他有一个印象就是，他觉得台湾的经济很大程度被中国来掌控，然后他居然也觉得这是一个非常好的机会，在台湾推广 UBI，因为他这个台湾经济的脆弱性，它不是从个体出发，它不是从个体不一定是从个体的低薪或者是个体的那个自由出发，它也许会从就是更总体的，就是我们面对来自中国的威胁的那种经济的不稳定性，我觉得蛮有趣的，我也没有想过这个，对，这大概是我今天想到的。
我可以延伸问一下，那个就是刚刚光 K campaign 那边他是讲到说 Yelp 是不是一个像 Google 评论的东西？
对，就是评论，就是评论餐厅的那种。
啊，他刚刚有说就是要跟这个东西的关联，我刚刚是 miss 掉这一段。
哦，没有，他就是说Yelp有那种贴纸，优良店家的贴纸这样子，然后大家看到他就会觉得它是好店这样子，然后他只是想到就是可以用，也是可以用贴纸，应该是这样，
刚刚还漏掉。好，可以之后再麻烦方武跟月强帮我看一下中文摘要的地方，因为 podcast 延伸的一些细节可能会从这边补充这样。
好啊，
好。
我也觉得中国因素那个观点是还蛮有趣，他真的是想得很深入，而且跟他爸聊。
对，
这个感觉是
我觉
一个要
他爸应该是韩粉，
我也觉得，
对，我就是他既然觉得年轻人没有动员，那就一定是韩粉啊！
笑死我。
意外发现这个真的很好笑。
对，
我觉得两岸议题真的是蛮有趣的一个观察。然后我还想问，就是刚刚说志工型活动的后续那一段，我有点 miss 掉，他是有提到什么 mission 跟 vision statement，还是请大家来写？
但我觉得他那边其实也没有特别讲到什么，就他其实就是在讲说他们也还没有想好下一步要怎么办。然后 Andrew Yang 的新的那个
Humanity Forward，
对，还蛮出奇的。
就是他说 Humanity Forward 的那个规模比较小，然后就是有几个就是可能他专门就是政治倡议者，就是专业的在里面，然后可是就有批评说，就是他们好像做的还没有志工好那种感觉，然后所以他希望 Andrew Yang 可以把那个 Humanity Forward 让更多志工参与，然后给他们更多就是自主的权利这样子。
我其实这个我觉得听他讲，我自己觉得还蛮有趣的。因为他前面不是有说，就是他们其实没有给志工任何 guideline，或是给他们任何限制。你觉得这是可能跟台湾在做志工培训其实差异蛮大的。那我自己知道绿色和平组织跟一些接疗的组织，他们在培训的时候可能都会有一些 tour guide 就是一些文件素材，告诉大家说怎么说。 当然还是可以有一些自己衍生，但我不知道他们就是这个烟 campaign 这些志工是什么都没有的，然后就是让他们用他们自己的语言，甚至他们自己去收集说可能 UBI 裁员是什么，都是他自己去听 podcast 补充来的。那我自己觉得他对这件事情的诠释还不错。然后他可能是说，正是因为可能他们是一群很有热忱的人，然后在这没有规范的情况下，他们就是用他们自己的语言跟他们对这个东西的热情去把这些论述填充起来，会有更落地的观点。自己觉得那是一个还蛮 empower 的过程啊，就是相较于台湾比较是教学式跟由上到下告诉你说要怎么去传递出去，他们的讲述论述的方式反而更落地，就也跟 Scott Sentence 讲到的东西很像，就是尝试着用反对者的语言去把这些内容起来。好，那最后可以再请岳翔跟 Tyler 也补充一下你们自己觉得最有 insight 或是最印象深刻的故事。
我蛮喜欢他讲的那个中国因素，我同意大家的那个看法。然后我也觉得他讲到那个印度阿姨，他觉得就是他那个印度阿姨突然有去给 Andrew 投票，然后他说，其实我们在做事情的时候，我们不知道我们影响到底多大，只有后来我们才发现，其实我们做一个小小的事情有一个很大的影响。对，所以我觉得其实这个说法，我们可以做一个那个贴图之类的。
我也蛮同意的。我觉得就是他分享的那些故事都还不错，就跟我们前面2个做的访问还蛮不一样的，因为他真的是就是从就是就是实际行动，然后去做，而且他就那个时候他讲到他接触眼镜，然后他不确定要不要去 Iowa， 然后我才意识到说他其实可能应该也有工作啊什么那些东西，然后但他加入志工就是成为志工，然后愿意付出还蛮多他自己的时间跟心力去推。
Tyler 就是 Rick 在就是这个活动里面算是 leader 的角色，还是他是一个就是很有热忱？
我觉得他是职工吧，眼镜职工。他是那个 campaign 的职工
哦，蛮有趣的，因为我以为他 reach out 的时候是因为他可能是我一直想象说他是同桌的，那他是一个超级有热忱的志工，因为是他主动联系Tyler说他看到我们丢出的讯息。
哦，对啊，我也觉得他真的还蛮有热情，尤其是他前面的时候，他还做了那个 text banking 啊 phone banking， 我觉得那超累的，那真的是
我没有听到那一段可以补充
他就只是在讲那个他为什么会成为就是正式加入 Yang， 就是他刚开始捐款，然后他说什么他捐款已经就是捐到不能再捐还是什么的，然后他才开始就是去传简讯，然后打电话，就是那种随便拨电话，然后别人接起来你就跟他讲说就是跟他宣传这样，然后后来他才因缘际会之下就是正式成为志工。
真的，他真的是超扯的，他故事就可以介绍一阵。好，那今天内容好像差不多是这样吗？那等一下会再把中英文摘要丢在那个群组上，然后我想一下，会把这个东西丢到群组上，然后麻烦就是方如跟岳翔帮忙补充中英文的摘要，然后请Tyler把这个录影啊，还有刚截图是有谁截啊？有人截吗？
我们大家都可以看啊，我这边都有拍啊。
好，那在就是刚刚如果有帮我截图可爱照片的人，可以帮我就是丢到群组里面。 就是因为我们会 po 到 Facebook 上，然后就是再请Tyler传录音，然后有截图的人可以丢一下，然后我们就今天晚上可能就周末的时候稍微把摘要整理一下，应该就差不多了。好，耶，我们结束了这一 round 最后一位受访者，
谢谢大家，
太辛苦了，
辛苦了，
好，大家去吃饭吧，拜拜。
拜
拜拜。
拜。